Welcome to Drum Circle News, Season 3, Episode 3. Today I have a special conversation with myself, Brook Thompson, Aroha, and is brought to us by Proven Sustainable. It's a very interesting conversation today because we have two Lamprey experts, and so we're going to really get into some Indigenous-led restoration, specifically river restoration, and conversations around traditional ecological knowledge, which is near and dear to my heart. Well, Proving Sustainable is the one who linked us to Aroha, so I wanted to give Kelsey a chance to introduce their organization, what they're about, and where you can find them.
Thank you so much, Dylan, and it is such a lovely experience always to be in virtual space with you and Brooke and Aroha. And I've connected with Aroha a few years ago, and we've been able to maintain a lovely rapport via email and Zoom calls now and then. And we have an extended recorded conversation with her on our site, provensustainable.org. And we have a podcast, which is the Proven Sustainable Conversations, mainly where your podcasts are streamed. And then we're on YouTube and social media as well under Proven Sustainable. And we had the honor of connecting with you through our dear friend and colleague, Four Arrows. And he also is an ongoing dear relation with us. And we have a recorded conversation with him. And we're excited to share the conversation we have with you and Brooke as well. And really, ultimately, Proven Sustainable is about helping people become more conscious of our often unconscious colonized conditionings and ways of thinking, and really learning and supporting Indigenous and African Maroon individuals, collectives, and supporters. So I'm really, again, just so happy to be here for the beginning of this and then really hand it off for the three of you to just have an incredible dialogue amongst each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelsey.
Goodbye. Enjoy. And I look forward to hearing how it went via email afterwards.
See ya. All right. Well, I'll let you guys give your own introductions for the Drum Circle News audience, starting with you, Aroha.
Ko te kupu, ko te atua, ko ranginui ki runga, ko papatunu ku ke raro, ko make ai te tangata ka po, ka ao, ka Aotearoa Māori ora. Ko Waiau, ko kainui te waka, ko tararua ngā taupare te maunga, ko otaki, ohau, waihau ngā awa, ko Ngāti Raukawa te iwi, ko taku ta Aroha Spinks tōku ingoa nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Just a mihi in acknowledgement to you, Dylan and Brooke and your ancestors, and a mihi to the deities. Dr. Aroha Spinks, from New Zealand, environmental scientist, love to support the Indigenous work with Māori and our tribes in New Zealand, in the Kapiti region, Waikato region, and had the honour to also just support some of the other iwi tribes around Aotearoa. So kia ora, thank you so much for inviting me to speak.
Yeah, and thank you for the introduction. I am Brook Thompson, so I hui now Brooke. Watek me cook Eureka ak pudaglawe ese pichaglawe ne pichuas iwak Archie Thompson, Napsech Willie Thompson. And so my name is Brooke. I'm currently in Humboldt in Northern California. I am from the Yurok and Yurok tribes, Yurok enrolled. And I'm the granddaughter of Archie Thompson, the daughter of Willie Thompson. And I am a lot of things. Currently a full-time PhD student at UC Santa Cruz, where I'm pursuing a PhD in environmental studies that's focused on water policy, traditional ecological knowledge, restoration theory, and co-management agreements, and Chinook salmon and around anything around Chinook salmon. And in addition to that, I have a BS in civil engineering from Portland State University with a minor in political science. When I was an undergrad, I also studied at University of Oakland, and for a short while where I took, and I think we correspond in email slightly, but that's where I took Māori worldview studies and took sociology and advertising classes over there. And I also have a master's in environmental engineering and civil engineering from Stanford University with a focus on water resources and hydrology. I'm a children's book author of I Love Salmon and Lampreys. And I also just have a small personal education business called Thompson Teachings LLC, where I sell educational material and salmon and lamprey stuffed animals, card games around oceans. And I'm also a part-time restoration engineer occasionally for the Yurok Tribe.
Amazing. Yeah, there's so much going on. It's I don't know how you keep up with it. So, but that's so amazing. You guys both have so much crossover and things in common as far as your work goes. So this conversation is really mostly going to be between you two. I'm going to do my best to facilitate it. I want to start off by trying to identify the commonalities. And so let's start with, what is the river system? What is the water system that you are engaged in for your restoration in New Zealand?
Good, Dylan. And I completely agree with you. The crossover of the amount of mahi and things in common to have with Brook is quite fascinating. You're coming to Auckland and to New Zealand to study as well, amongst all her amazing things. The work that we've been doing probably in the last decade or so with my cousins and whānau is around the Kapiti region. So I had the honour to be doing my PhD on the restoration work at Lake Waioromai and supporting the sub-tribes. There are 5 around the Ōtaki region, but also Ngāti Tukorehe had started over 30 years ago on a tahaka wetlands around a lagoon coastal area in our tribal area there, but a number of stream systems along the Horowhenua Kapiti region. Yeah. Also mention that I'm not a lamprey expert. I have to That's a beautiful intro though, Dylan. But yeah, for me, last year was a highlight to actually go and check out where the babies were. So with some of the work that I do with the tribes, I was helping as one of the scientists in the environment unit, and we had a consent that was coming up to extract a gravel from a particular area in a stream that our tribe knew was high with the lamprey. And often in those situations, working with the local government, they wanted to know as well. I had never been into the electric fishing before, so I was like, oh goodness, wasn't too keen on that kind of practice, but I was like keen to go and learn. And it was amazing because these little babies, our river systems are quite silted from the loss of forest and agriculture going on. So the babies were all hiding in that mud. And it was a fascinating experience because we did have the scientists saying that they were there to validate the mātauranga Māori, the Māori knowledge. And within 10 minutes, they'd seen more lamprey juveniles, more lamprey than they'd ever seen in their careers. And they had 2 scientists with 30-year careers, and they'd never seen so many. So it was a wonderful experience, cross-cultural experience as well.
So what would you say your expertise is in? If you were going to say what do you specialize in?
It's a great question. My doctorate is in restoration ecology. I think in the work that I do, similar to Brook, wearing numerous hats. I am a fisheries scientist, so I did my 2 degrees in Australia at what is now called the University of Tasmania. It was the Australian Maritime College. I have 2 degrees in Bachelor of Applied Science in Fisheries, graduated with distinction from the first one and graduated with first class honours for the second one. So I do have that fisheries science background as well. So sometimes I'll put on the fisheries scientist hat for my doctorate, working with our local tribes on restoring the riparian margins and restoring some of the water systems, because all of that, of course, goes out, protects all the juveniles, and it feeds the ocean and that coastal area. So it was a really nice link to be working in that area.
What is the restoration environment kind of looking like? And to give you an example, what I'm trying to get at, for the Yuroks, we have a Yurok Construction Corporation, which is owned by our tribe. We also have a fisheries department, which is a tribal department. And through the technical services program, we hold state and federal contracts to then engage in the restoration projects. And then we have state partners, federal partners. We also work with nonprofit agencies. We do, we work on public lands like BLM, National Forests, and we also do government easements on private property. So working with landowners to engage in this restoration. What is that looking like, the landscape for New Zealand and restoration projects?
Admittedly, as of a few months ago, I've moved to Australia. But I'm talking about back home and what it looks like in the Ōtaki region. We have had in the Ōtaki area a number of years where the elders have worked on advisory groups with councils and been very much involved in helping to build those relationships with the local authorities. So we have tribal authorities set up as in Runanga, as in Ngā Hapu Ōtaki, as a mandated organisation as well, to represent the 5 sub-tribes around the Ōtaki region. And for a number of years, I've been working alongside Professor Huhana Smith, as well as Moira Potama. And in those projects, we worked in a collaborative project with Massey University, Cawthorne Research Institute, other iwi as well. And through the years, went from being project partners to actually having co-leadership roles in those projects, as well as then seeking the funding ourselves and being the leaders of certain projects that we're working on within the restoration area. I think one of the successes that I talked about in my doctorate, and with the work that me and my cousins also promote, is around working collaboratively. We have no hesitation to pull in different experts from different organisations to help us do these amazing projects, because we think that, more than the sum of the parts, coming together, brainstorming, bringing different expertise. We'll also always in those projects be looking for our own experts and having them involved. All our work is centred on having the local tribes and elders supported, and what we call kaitaki guardians, those who know the ecosystems really, really well and live, breathe, and usually have generations of knowledge really supported. And, I think it's one of our roles to protect them and how they navigate those projects and situations.
So do the tribal nations in New Zealand have their own departments and agencies that engage in restoration, or is it typically an Indigenous person who goes and obtains knowledge and then works for a, I guess colonial system would be the way that I would describe it?
In Aotearoa, for some time now, there's been a lot of revitalisation of our language, of our culture, coming back after colonisation and those impacts that have, gravely affected our environments, from deforestation in the late 80s, 1800s. 1900s had the agriculture industrial movement coming through. So there was a time and a period of great hurt for our people as well as our environment. I believe that we have that revitalisation within the Western knowledge institutes as well as our own now, and we've got generations coming out very strong in their culture as well as in the Western academic areas, and they're really thriving. They work within departments of ministries, as well as working with authorities, local government, national government. But yeah, we certainly have our own tribal organisations, and that can be big ones or small ones that are well established and working for the marae, working for your ancestral home and working for your people. So we have a growing number of Indigenous people coming through that are really strong in both worlds.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of set the table, set the landscape of how this Indigenous-led restoration is happening, both in Yurok ancestral territory and your ancestral territory over in New Zealand.
It can be so easy when we live with our own communities and our own government systems day to day. Things that might not translate one-to-one can sometimes go over our heads. Like just being clear that like iwi is not exactly the same as tribes in the U.S., but it's like kind of roughly translates to what we consider tribes within the U.S. In addition to that, right, there's over 100 iwis in New Zealand. Well, like in California, I think we have over 200 recognized tribes. So just trying to get a sense of that, how many groups there are coming to the table. One of the big differences I also remember is, and again, feel free to correct me anytime, is that in New Zealand Parliament, there's 7 seats that are specifically held for, at least for Māori people. And also, I am so sorry for my pronunciations of everything, but there's at least 7 seats held versus in the United States. There's no federal seats that are specifically set for Indigenous peoples or tribal people. So that form already at like the highest level that then comes down to like natural sciences is already a little bit different. I know it's a little bit confusing too, because there's that difference between like a lot of, I know iwis are also like formed as almost corporations so they can better like communicate with the government itself, almost like how Alaska Natives do in the United States system. But it's like all these things have approximations, but are not one-to-one in our government systems, and how the governments run really differs in my understanding on how like management works on the day-to-day basis, because our governments are similar colonial forces, but also how the US Congress works and are working with the federal government versus state is different than the New Zealand like parliament versus like iwi communication. So I was just gonna just lay that out, because that's my understanding of some of the main differences that from the government that ends up affecting how then restoration work is communicated.
No, I think that was wonderful to hear the comparisons and to know, because of course, yeah, I can only come from our perspective. So it's really nice, Brook, that you've been to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and can also help with that for perhaps some of the viewers. I will have a shout out there for my cousin Takita Ferris, who is one of the Te Pāti Māori MPs at the moment. He's an amazing guy who is actually, fluent in his reo, his mātauranga, his language and his knowledge around Māori culture, and he has an absolute passion for fishing, and so that's why we'd worked a lot. I was the environmental science director for WWF in New Zealand, and we got to work on a number of projects together before he headed into the Parliament and the Beehive. But I just also think that at the heart of the restoration project is, and for me and why I love doing this kind of work, is getting out into the field and into the environment and making a real impact. And that was always one of my questions during the interview was, will I get to get out and plant some trees, fence off some waterways and help improve ecosystems? It's just something that I'm really passionate about, and my kids have grown up with it. So you see my thesis or any of my presentations that I've done in conferences, you'll see my kids there somewhere, someone's shoulders or within the artwork or somehow involved. Kia ora.
Aroha, what would you say your most influential thesis has been?
Definitely my most influential piece was my PhD thesis. I really enjoyed the opportunity to write about and go through that process with my tribe, to not only plant all the plants, but to be given the opportunity to write that with Massey University. With projects such as this, there was the protection that you didn't necessarily have to publish the work. But I'm so glad that my tribe gave me the permission to publish the work. And for them, it was a record. They'd wanted to do the project for about 30 years. They'd received funding several times, but I was paid by our environmental unit to be there, so like almost 24 hours, 7 days a week, which really helped because with the work with our tribes, they're available to go plant trees and get out and do stuff on the weekends or the evenings, and yet all the contractors or perhaps authorities or people giving different parts of advice were during the week, during their working week. So having somebody that could just be there, and I think one of the biggest points around the thesis was that it was successful because of all the different people coming through and giving the iwi, the tribes, and the hapu, the people, the opportunity to be free in expressing their values and doing things in their way, because it didn't always line up with what the funders wanted or the local authorities wanted, but always throughout the whole project, it was led by their own appointed guardians, kaitiaki. So I had 2 elders, 2 scientists, and a film director, chosen by the whānau that I could just constantly talk to, get approval from them to move forward with the project. And so it was always led by the people, and they still have people going back and planting, they run it themselves, and it's been an amazing journey to have been on with them.
So what did that project accomplish?
Yes, reconnection of the people. It protected the lake. The cows were it was farmed by one of the uncles, so cows were up inside the sacred lake. They'd have a bath there every summer, drinking all the water. It was clogged. The water system in the stream out to the ocean was blocked, and some other culverts were also collapsed. So we were changed 2 of those and had the whitebait and other species able to travel up, so the eels could still migrate and go out because they can go on land. However, we were able to open it up so some of the whitebait species could come back through. So we planted thousands of native plants. We translocated different flaxes around, but we also had, I think, 2 of the local schools involved with planting. Actually, I think there were 3. Another early learning childhood institute came out as well, and they've gone on to do their own projects within their own schools and restoration projects through some of those connections. I think Tiritoa was already planting up around one of their little hillsides, but the opportunity to come out to a sacred site and be involved. So there's a whole lot of learning that's still going on today out there at the lake. So, and
when you are talking, sorry to interrupt, I was curious, when you say eel, are you meaning the tuna specifically?
Yes. Yep.
Would would you explain the significance of tuna and why? Because it's very confusing with the name tuna, obviously. And we call the significant food source to us lamprey eels, but they're not technically eels. But yours are actually eels. So just for everyone who doesn't have context of what that fish is.
Okay. Yeah. So eels are a taonga. They are a treasure species. They were one of our staple diets that we did use. So, and love their flourish because they were in the thousands. So they would just migrate in the thousands out. They go to Tonga to spawn and come back again, migrate back and come back into our waterways. Western scientists will say there's a long fin, the short fin. Māori, we have about 8 different species. So whether they bark or they're yellow or they have different colours, there's different species for us. They were known to be in different lake systems or streams or rivers, and we would even keep them in earwares. We'd call them tuna. So we would keep them and store them. They were a delicacy. They're delicious. They're delicious smoked. Tuna nuggets. One of our Tukorehe uncles is famous for making them into nuggets. But yeah, we really loved them. The ones at Wairongamai were famous, and they were famous because there was a particular shrimp that they ate that made them more delicious. And during my doctoral research, we found them. Yeah, and so that was really neat. And it showed that there was a level of that salt water coming through. So it became one of my ecological parameters to measure. But yeah, so that's a little bit about eels.
That's amazing, and that story actually segues into exactly where I want this conversation to go, which is where we can discuss the difference between the indigenous perspectives and our approach towards restoration and our relationship with the land versus the Western approach and the relationship that we have to have with that Western approach as we're engaging in this land restoration. Leading into that, I'd like to turn it over to Brooke and let her start off by identifying traditional ecological knowledge and maybe her take on our approach and how the way we do things, and then get into the conversation versus New Zealand and your traditional ecological knowledge approach.
Before I start off, since we're on the subject of eels really quickly, since there's one of learning about tuna, and again, it's going to be confusing for people listening. Tuna is not the fish. Tuna is the name of the eel in New Zealand. Or on the subject of the tuna, the eels, they are this word's hard, cadronymous, which means that they're the opposite of androgynous. So our lamprey, our eels, they go into the ocean, they get big, and they come inland into the streams and freshwater to breed. And these eels are the opposite. So they go out to the salt water to breed. And because of that, because they're both migratory animals, they're both affected by hydropower and have dams that block their migration patterns. So just when I was in university there, having that connection of being like, oh, there's this eel-like fish that's very important to both of our people who are both being affected by hydropower. And just that sense being like, oh, I'm thousands of miles or thousands of kilometers translating for the other audience around the world. And yet Indigenous peoples are facing the exact same issues that I am at home. And there's almost like that sense of solidarity in similarities between our cultures, but almost this sense of solidarity for me in the sense of perpetuated colonialism and how that's like affected us on an environmental level in 2 different spaces. A lot of my lifelong work has been around the Klamath Dam removals, which the Klamath Dams have been the largest dam removal project in world history thus far. And me personally seeing the devastation as a young girl growing up on the reservation on the river has led me to the current career path I am in academia. And we were talking about how I've got here and like the type of research work I'm doing or the type of work on the ground that I'm participating in. It is mainly trying to figure out, we were able to get this amazing project done with the thanks to many organizations, many local governments, federal governments, just all these groups of peoples and tribes to get this dam removal project done and do the continuing restoration work that is happening as we speak for the next several years formally. But in my personal opinion, I think restoration work never ends. It's a continuous act. Thinking about my own place, I'm trying to understand how I can participate in systems that maybe were not built for us as Indigenous peoples, and we're actually a part of the colonial process to remove us, and what that looks like, and how do I work in a space where maybe there's good opportunities, but in a way that's not going to continue to jeopardize or pretty much like stigmatize our communities. Even if it seems like a good opportunity, maybe it still has harmful impacts. And how I balance between like my idealism with restoration, how I think things ought to be, compared to the reality, and making change here and now to try to make this ought to be a reality someday, while at the same time not trying to continue to perpetuate the same systems that have historically oppressed us, but just with a native face on the front instead of a white one. And so trying to understand like kind of these larger struggles I have as someone who's an engineer and works within restoration is kind of what's led me to my PhD work, and like on the more theoretical side, and trying to like take these larger ideas and struggles I have morally and put them into a practical approach and see what's been done so far, where it's worked, where it hasn't worked, and where it can go from here, in a way to just make our approaches to restoration and working with these different groups who may have different wants, different values, but also positively some of the same values and wants, more successful going forward, and how we reconcile these different worldviews and trying to uplift the fact that Indigenous worldviews have directly led to more sustainable practices, and that I feel like it's sometimes fighting a losing battle where I'm just like, oh, I feel like all these restoration people really also need like history lessons, and all these engineers also need all these history lessons that they just aren't getting. And if they had these like more in-depth histories taught by Indigenous peoples, then we'd start on a more equal footing where they'd understand why we're having some of these disagreements when it comes to restoration work. And then trying to balance that with my personal exhaustion of like, how much work am I willing to do and put my like own spirit and kind of like just exhaustion and time and energy on the line to try to make this change. So that is very broadly what I'm trying to do, if that makes any sense at all.
It definitely makes sense. There is a huge structural issue in regards to restoration work, and things need to be done differently, where the Indigenous perspectives are taken more seriously, rather than just being a box that you check. And we need to create an actual process that can be used and implemented as the way things are done, versus just a consultation with the tribes. And that's really kind of the issue. Is in the Western systems, it's all structural. It's like the step 1, 2, 3, hypothesis, completion, time value, all this different stuff. And that's not the way that Indigenous people operate. It's more of an interpersonal relationship. You know, I'm not gonna go over to my grandma's house and then I have a list of like, okay, grandma, I need to ask you these questions. Now it's time for you to make me a meal. All right, it's 6 o'clock. I gotta go. Bye. I'll see you later. Like, that's not how we do things. You know, we show up and we really show up in a meaningful way and treat everything as an individual, whether that's a plant or a fish, whether that's a mountain range, or an ecosystem in general. And I think we need to start closely coveting our territories. I mean, ancestrally, we've always done that, but we need to bring that and give ownership. And even ownership is not the word to use, but I guess bring in the Western approach and have them meet us where we are, so that we can actually engage in restoration the way that it needs to be done. And so what kind of structural issues do you face in New Zealand trying to engage in restoration?
Yes, well, so much of your words I can relate to, Brook and Dylan. Yes, so to answer your question, I just want to firstly point out that we have similar struggles. Your words, Brook and Dylan, I can completely relate to. It has been, when I was first called into work in the environmental space, I actually had my first child. So I was at home and available, and the cousins sort of like, we've got a restoration project coming up, we'd love a scientist. And one of the things that I found, having had a Western science background, was the in a pivotal position of hearing both sides and being able to help. Sometimes it was similar to what you were doing earlier, Brooke, with the communications going, great intentions on both sides, and just maybe different interpretations of some of the wording. And so in some of the pivotal points within projects, I'd be able to go, now hang on a moment, go back to our people, go, did you mean this? And they were like, oh no, when I'd explain some of the scientific terms that the scientists were using. And then, similarly go back to the scientists and going, when you spoke these scientific terms, you lost my people. And they were interpreting it this way, and similarly backwards. So we kind of, me and my cousins would call ourselves in the intertidal zone, within this buffer zone where the ocean kind of beats you up. And then you can get beaten up from the land a little bit too, out, underwater, deep, or out into dry on either side. And I just really want to encourage you both in the areas in which you're working, that you're just so important, and others that are perhaps listening, that it's just so important to be there. And one of the sort of like words of wisdom that came from one of my amazing uncles, the Riparian Waka, is something that he was really a huge advocate, and he's from the military, so he goes hard, and his elders had told him, get your foot inside the door. Stop banging on it. Get yourself inside the door. And so he was one of the leading tribal people to go into the local governments and sit on advisory boards, that then made way for funding to come our direction so that we could do the projects that we wanted to do. More opportunities for that sharing of knowledge to happen. It is, by no means simple today. So we still are struggling in different positions, working with authorities. Right now, politically, we have a government that is giving Māori a hard time, as you might have seen by the haka that hit the news. So we still have some who are still trying to oppress us, but we have, some strength within our communities. There is more of an awareness with people who are not Māori as well. So certainly some of the projects in which we start will take the people from the authorities or the scientists. We introduce them to our lands and our ancestral homes and our people, and have that opportunity to have people speaking, both from the authorities' point of view or experts' point of view, but always starting with our own, so that they can learn about our environment and about our values. Because I think in this environmental space, it is really challenging. So you've got to have some tough skin. When I was guest lecturer at any university, whether it's Māori universities or the Western Science Universities, so you've got to have some tough skin, some broad shoulders, kia kaha, have strength to keep going. And I think more opportunities, and I guess that's one of the reasons for coming today, of sharing, inspiring each other. The more we can share knowledge, the better our planet will be. And for me, one of the amazing projects that I was involved in 2023 and 25 was the Whaitua Kapiti project, where we worked with authorities, and it was Ngāti Raukawa, Ngā Hapu Otake, Te Aotearoa, and Ngāti Tukorehe, all working together in a treaty model approach, which was an approach that was put forward by one of our professors, Whatarari Puriaka, who looked at a model which had a Indigenous house, as well as the authorities with their governance house that had to come together. So you got to operate yourself in your own cultural way, and come together in order to make all the decisions in what we call a treaty house. And that was a model that worked for that project, and I think I sent some links through on the publications that came out of that. And so now it's implementing those in policies, plans, and action on the ground, which is exciting.
One of the models I use since living in Aotearoa has been the where tapa wa, the four-sided house model for health.
Right.
So Māori houses, they're kind of like our own in the Yurok tribes, where we have square houses. There's a lot of tribes that have round houses, but we have square ones with sides and a roof. And in the Māori model, it's like each of these four pillars that make up the house in a sense of health is like a family health / social health, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And I have used that model so much in my everyday life. So actually, when I talk to people about the importance of restoration in salmon, I talk about how loss of salmon is not just like the loss of the physical salmon. It's not the loss of not just the loss of our physical health, because right, we're not eating that healthy food anymore. So our blood pressure goes up, diabetes rates go up, cardiovascular disease goes up when we don't have that access to the food. But also our family and social health declines, because fishing is a family activity. I go fishing with my dad, my uncles, my cousins, and so we're spending time together on the river. And then that salmon is used for ceremony. That salmon is used for funerals, for weddings, for all our big events. That salmon we're eating together and coming together when catching it and when eating it. So when we don't have that, and you have to find jobs other places or do other things, then it starts to erode that family social health. And then the mental, emotional health too, because again, it's not that these health things are separate from each other. They're all interconnected as well, right? When your physical health isn't doing well and your social health isn't doing well, it also takes a toll on your mental health, as well as, for me, not being on the river, not being around the water, like being on the water itself is a form of mental health and meditation. And so our mental health goes down as well. And especially if you don't have the fish for ceremony, or you're not participating in the customs around fishing with the culture, then that also declines mental health, because ceremony is prayer. Prayer helps our mental health. And then, right, all that's going into the spiritual too, with the ceremony, with the salmon, with the family, with mental health. And so I just am so grateful for who's ever been willing to share that knowledge with students like me, because it has been so, when I was told that, because I've only had the Western framework of like Western health and being like, it's all physical, and maybe we'll recognize a little mental here and there, but really it's all focused on physical. It like just opened my mind so much, being like, this makes so much more sense to my life. So I just wanted, because I heard you talk about like the pillars of the house, I just want to point that out, that that's been a really big influence on my life personally. And just my thankfulness for sharing these information back and forth. And also I wanted to point out too, from something you said earlier, we're trying to get people to meet us, to not only meet, you know, like, was it Pakeha? Like foreigners, or basically like white folks where they're at, but trying to get them to come closer to where we're at as well. And I thought in your dissertation, you did a really great job of that by having that glossary of Māori words and terms that you're integrating throughout your dissertation. And that's really exciting for me, because as someone whose grandfather was the last living fluent speaker of my language, of the Yurok language, and growing up with that in my household, there's so many terms and so much understanding that comes from the language that does not translate one-to-one in English, or maybe there's concepts that don't exist in English. And so I think just being like, okay, well, I have to publish this dissertation in English for at least the most part to be widely accepted, but then to also be like, hey, I'm going to integrate my own language. And especially when it comes to restoration, like these terms like mana and like family and all these like concepts that are very not one-to-one to English terms or understandings. And you were like, I don't know how common this is, but that was just very inspiring for me to read, being like, I'm going to force you to use these terms from like the Māori people, versus me having to translate everything in English to appease everyone else. So I just wanted to point that out as something that's also inspiring to me.
Yeah, I really appreciate the work that you guys are both engaged in and translating this scientific into the indigenous worldview. And I've taken that and it's inspired me and allowed me to be able to translate in conversations. You know, my degree and my background is in business, and I was recently at a ecological workforce initiative, and they had basically outlined the restoration projects that were going on in Humboldt County for the next 4 years. And of course, it has to do with money because that's the way that the Western people think. And so, what they had outlined is in the next 4 years in Humboldt County, there's going to be $280 million worth of projects, and there's going to be 1,000 jobs created in Humboldt County over the next 4 years. And part of that assessment is also the impact on the local economy. And so, that means that the numbers that they had ran said that it was going to be upwards of $350 million of local impact into the economy. But what they had not taken into account is the impact, the positive impact on health, and how that'll help the healthcare system. It'll bring down the impact. People who don't have access to healthcare systems, one, already are going to be better impacted because they are going to be healthier. They're not going to need to go see a doctor that they can't see because they can't travel over the mountain, you know, or there's going to be less people going to the hospital where there's already not enough healthcare workers to be able to see everyone. And I think that's really important. You know, I have an aunt, my Aunt Kristen, she passed away because she was not able to get herself to the healthcare system. She couldn't travel. You know, she had problems with her legs, and so she wasn't able to drive those far distances, and ultimately that led to her passing. And this happens all the time in the Native American community, especially with us being displaced from our from the way we used to live on the rivers and our natural food sources, and then that affects our mental health. And so, you know, I appreciate you guys doing this data and the science and providing this language so that when I go in this meeting, I can be like, hey, you're not even looking at this effect over here. Those numbers should be a lot greater. And it's not just about the economic impact either. It's about the social impact as well.
Absolutely, Dylan. Like, I just want to mihi and send love, aroha, to your auntie and also to your ancestors. You know, that's, yeah, that health is just so important. It's so much more valuable than just the monetary value of anything. You know, the effect of that is for families, for tribes, and having the healthy environment. And you know, all that you're doing and being in those places to say it's more than just monetary. I've spent a few years doing treaty research as well, and it was similar when I go into the tribunals up against the government lawyers to have that conversation around, you might be looking at a profit and loss situation with a business, but we're talking about so much more than that. You know, we're talking about if there were jobs, and we're running our own businesses, and it's fantastic to hear the number of businesses your people are running. That's inspirational for all our young people to run their own businesses, to have management positions, to have governance positions, and all of that sharing of knowledge, and then to be able to have businesses that are upholding your values and, you know, also having your practices. It's just like so important. You mentioned about like the Western scientists sometimes having that methodology of 1 through to 10, and during my thesis had a similar thing with my main supervisor, because I was saying I'm taking a Māori approach, and I tried to explain to him, like, you know, I said, like, you might have these in a Western method 1 to 10. And I said, but in Māori, we've got these 10, and like 2 and 3 are popping out. Guys, you know, the people have decided 9's coming forward. Actually, we'll get rid of 10. We don't need it, you know. And that's a Māori way of the approach, and moving and fluid. And sometimes I wish if authorities would also allow, and that's something we were striving for in the policy making and things like that, is actually at times when you also know it needs to be done, but you can't because of your policies or your strictness, or, can't happen, then the fallback should be Māori and the local tribe, because we'll put at the forefront the environment, the people, and then the others will come afterwards. So if it gets the tick in the okay from us, then it's good to go. And your work that you have been doing in dams did inspire one of the projects that we were working on in the Whaitua Kapiti, because there was and probably still is, a desire from local authorities to put a dam into one of the rivers, not in our tribe, but in the tribe next door. So the iwi, of course, were not, okay with that, and we were able to use some of the published information from overseas, such as your one over there, Brook, and go, look, these ones are coming down because of all this research, and look, we've got science to back that up. And yes, I think if we can have the Indigenous knowledge actually, at least on par, if not more, because it's generational knowledge, being valued, will be really important for the future.
That's one of my hopes with my research and those who have come before me in the academic sense, is that just because our tribes over here are way across the ocean, at the end of the day we are still people of the Pacific. And I hope that I guess my call to action personally would be to people listening to this podcast and the series that are from tribal nations here in the US, is that I would also like people to see support over internationally to Aotearoa, so we can be stronger as larger communities together. Because when I was at Standing Rock in North Dakota during the Dakota Access Pipeline, I saw a lot of people who are Māori come over and support us there. And even when we did the first descent on the Klamath River with all the youth coming, there was also Māori youth there when we met and got to the ocean. And so I just want to make that point that we have these academic ways and these policy frameworks that we can look at from each other's nations and help support each other that way. But I also don't want to roll out that we can fundraise and physically be on the ground to help in person support one another, because especially I think when things get that international spotlight and the governments get a little bit more pressured, because it's not just their own country being looked at, sometimes it can have more of an impact too. So I just wanted to offer that up, that I'm happy to go over there and be in person, but that I think there's a lot of room, because we're in a time where we've never been able to connect to the extent that we have the ability to now. Our ancestors didn't have, I'm sure there was back and forth between our ancestors, but it definitely took a lot longer than it does on the 16-hour plane ride, which is also already feels too long. So I have no idea how anyone was in a waka or a canoe for as long as they were. They were much more patient than I am, but the fact that we do have this ability now that our ancestors didn't, to connect physically more often and even communicate like we are right now using the internet and these new communication tools, I think gives us a lot of opportunity to support one another with our restoration efforts that we may have not had previously. And I think that's really exciting.
I think now's a great time to soft launch a project that I have started, which is I have founded a 501c6 nonprofit. It's a workforce development nonprofit called the Tribal Workforce Trade Association. So it's a trade association that centers the Native American worker across all trades, and it's about workforce development so that we can train the Native American workforce to be able to do the jobs necessary. And so when you go in these meetings with the Workforce Initiative and you find these jobs coming out and it's 1,000 jobs being created, we need to be able to train our Native workers to be able to get those restoration jobs, and not just as laborers. We need our people in project management positions, program management, and we need them to be recognized for their knowledge and not just say, hey, here's a shovel, go and dig some plants up. And so that's something I'm working on. It's not just one tribe. It's going to be all federally recognized tribes are going to be able to be a part of this association. We're starting in the Northern California regional area to get the workforce trained up and be able to do these restoration jobs and have a voice and be equal to the union. For example, the unions in California have a lot of strength because they have strength in numbers and workers. and they have representatives that are going and engaging, having conversations with the assembly members, and they can work on PLA agreements. And so that's essentially what the Tribal Workforce Trade Association is going to be doing for Native American workers. Is we're going to be out there advocating, saying, hey, we need our Native workers, we need the first right of refusal for work, especially in our ancestral territories, especially when it comes to restoration. And we need the money put towards our apprenticeship training programs so that we can train our workers to be able to do these jobs. And that's what it comes in about, changing the structure and being able to advocate for ourselves. Unfortunately, we do have to do it within the Western frameworks, but once we understand how to do that, we can really use those frameworks to push our people and push our ways of life forward.
It just sounds really commendable, Dylan. And I think, you having been there right at the beginning and, having the insight to create that training program that brings people into those jobs that, that's opportunity there and making it available for your people. It's amazing. I think that's really awesome.
You guys could do the same thing in New Zealand. I'm trying to give you guys ideas. I don't know if you guys have a union. Do you have unions in New Zealand?
Not so much, but we actually do have Māori universities that are training up our people in training programs and social programs and things like that. I think we'd love to have a project that was coming up having 1,000 jobs. So I think we're just small as a country. So I think, it's like, wow, what opportunity you've got there. It's like amazing. We do have unions for nurses and the different ones. I think we've spent a bit of time now getting our own learning initiatives and our own schools, and that's been really a focus for Māori people. Brooke just mentioned about the Tapawha model from Mason Jury, one of my Ngāti Raukawa uncles. And I think, we've spent the sort of since the 80s really having our reo institutes with schools, and then schools, early childhood, as well as universities now that are bringing out people who have our cultural knowledge. So I think that's really kind of been our focus. I think we've also been in that political arena area of getting opportunities and funding for our people within ministries, and taking that approach as such. It might be something that we'll develop, though. We might look over, like Brooke was saying, to how you're going to do this, Dylan. Could be a model for us to utilise.
Well, if there's any aunties or uncles out there that want to learn the way that I've set up this association, I would definitely say reach out to me and I'll provide you. I mean, our government systems are a little bit different, so the process in which you do it might be different. But it's important that us as people, well, at least in America, we're sovereign nations. And so the Yurok Tribe itself is equal to the state of California. The same way the Karuk and the same way the Hoopa are. And so us being sovereign nations, it makes sense for us to represent our own people and our own voices. Although around the world, Indigenous people, I feel like, should represent themselves as sovereign as well. Whether you don't have the treaties with your government or not, I recognize Indigenous people as being sovereign. These systems were forced upon us, and so we need to start acting with our own agency and representing ourselves in that way. And so, if anyone wants to, over there from New Zealand, figure out a way to do that, I'd be happy to give some advice.
Yeah, and I was going to ask Dr. Spinks if you wanted to share the word, the equivalent word for sovereignty.
The tino rangatiratanga. So many of our tribes still believe that we do have tino rangatiratanga, and that the Treaty of Waitangi actually reinforced that. So our interpretation in Te Tiriti o Waitangi was written in Māori first. So within that, it established our tino rangatiratanga and our sovereignty to stay ourselves as ourselves. It was reinterpreted years later into English, and that's where we have differences within some of the definitions that then place the sovereignty in the Crown, and that is why we have all the settlements, and there's different tribes at different stages of their getting settlements due to the Crown recognising that actually that whole process and everything that they'd done to Māori was really detrimental and the opposite of what they'd actually agreed to. So you'll see still tribes, and we talk about it ourselves, that sovereignty actually remains. That the reality is quite different, and we're still pushing within the current system that we have. But you'll see within the treaty research that interpretation, and that's why I did a year in Japan, a global scholarship learning business in Japan, and the Japanese were really interested, like, why are you Māori still like talking about this treaty? And it was like, because it guaranteed our chiefs the right to govern their area, and what we'd agreed to in our conversation, our kōrero that we get from our ancestors, is some of the people from England that were arriving, or the Pākehā non-Māori who were arriving in our shores, starting to take lands and different things and be unruly. So you could govern those people because they're not like working out over here. So and
just to say, this is a great summarization, because there's whole classes just on this Treaty of Waitangi, and it is very complex, and like you said before, it's still in constant conversation, and a big deal. And I would just also like to point out that that's one of the things governmental wise that we are kind of similar with, is that the treaty was in 1840, I believe, and the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with a lot of our tribes in Northern California was around 1851, or the early 1850s. So having these treaties signed around the same time means a lot of these colonial governments were coming up with like these same types of wording around the same era. And the New Zealand Treaty of Waitangi is honestly much stronger than the ones we had that were never ratified in the US. But the fact that these were the same time periods pretty closely when we had these colonial powers try to come to us has led to a lot of these governmental similarities in a way, where other tribes who had correspondence for hundreds of more years with colonialists differ. And so that's one of the ways that I thought was really interesting, in how our governments are similar versus different with New Zealand. I also wanted to point out, I'm pretty sure, and not you're the expert here, but there's also the idea of self-determination and inherent sovereignty, right? Not just the legal sovereignty within the conversations with the Crown, but the inherent sovereignty that you as Indigenous peoples from the land possess, just from existing and being given from your ancestors.
Yes, absolutely, Brooke. I had the privilege to be asked by my iwi in the middle of my PhD to help out with the treaty research project, which again was a real honour. So having worked along other amazing experts in researching and then writing up, from the 1840, what that guaranteed, and where and how the different national government as well as local governments had actually caused the decline of our environment, and also what it did to our people. I think I've been involved in two really large research projects about that, and it was a privilege and an honour to actually have those tribes open up and share information. And certainly when Dylan was talking about interviewing our elders and things, there's no like set questions, it's a conversation and allowing them to open up, and again, those are available and they're published to show actually here is how you went about destroying our forests, here is what you went about destroying our lands or our waterways, and this is the ongoing then effects of what it had to our people, our stocks, and our fish, and being able to talk about that from a spiritual level, emotional level, right up to today, and in some ways trying to hold those authorities to account, but backing it up with science, but also just traditional knowledge. Here it is, and these are facts. Like, you have to be, thousands and thousands of archival records within departments to show them, here's your own documentation of what you did, and here's our people also sharing these.
Really quickly, I know we're pretty much out of time, Dylan, but when it comes to this part of the research, so part of my PhD research and research I've done for Oregon State University is interview tribal elders in the Yurok Tribe about salmon fishing, about the differences they've seen in water over the time, and 100% agree. You can come in with a structured conversation, but it is not going to go that way. Like you said, you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions labeled a 10, and you are going to jump around, forget 10, you're going to jump straight to 9, go back to 3, go to 2, but 2 in a different way. And just like, I wish you had told me that before I started this project. But one of my like bigger questions that relates to restoration is like, what's your thoughts on like the sharing part of like Indigenous knowledge? Because right, there's this, we talked about how beneficial sharing is between, especially I think between tribes and between governments. But then there's this other aspect, like when doing the tribal IRB, which is a process to get approval to make sure people are safe and not being exploited through the research, that a lot of it's supposed to be anonymous, and like trying to balance like how do we share this knowledge in a way that we can build upon it and that can be funded by research, because a lot of research funding requires that everything be published and everything be like open to the universities, but also keep the stuff that may be misused by bad actors or those, right? We talked previously about those who do want to come together, but I know there are those in the world who do want to find places where they can break us down to get more resources, to get more money, and to take the things we do hold sacred for their own benefit, even if I wish that weren't the truth. So how do you balance in research and the work you're doing, especially with elders and this knowledge, to be able to share and expand and learn, but also keep what's sacred to your iwi or to your smaller like hapu or like circle, and that difficulty with communication, what should be shared, what shouldn't, with the funders and these people who are like funding the research or the governments?
Yeah.
And in 5 words or less. No, I can't.
Yeah. So we first off, taking a Māori approach, we go and meet the tribes, go meet the whānau, have a kōrero first, so have that opportunity to share with them what the research might be about, what the project's about, and how our process will be. So we have utilised interview forms so that it's really clear who they want to leave it to in the future. And that anything that is written and published or videoed and available is approved by whoever their representative that they want to be, so they can choose who that is. That person can meet with all the whānau to agree that however they want to have their approval process later. And certainly in projects, we've had amazing interviews and the information has gone no further than giving it back to them. And sometimes made that very clear and had some tribes, relax a bit more to know that at the very least, if this goes absolutely nowhere else and it is a resource that we give back to you, then it's been a privilege to be here and facilitate that. And we've had that and gone, oh my gosh, that was like beautiful. And then we've had others, and we've still been really thanked by the families for holding on to that, to have maybe like their last elder with all this knowledge shared and given that information back. And then others, we've had them, pull it down, cut it back. We can draft and transcribe, give it back to their representative, who will then change it, transcribe it, come back. So we just have all those options. And I think that there is a little part in one of my chapters which it did talk about all the different tools in which we used within the projects. And my main supervisor...
I can't read all 600
pages.
No,
you wouldn't.
This, so I'll have to look more into it after.
Yeah, it was a chapter that talked about all the different tools, and they were saying, like, Aroha, why are you going to write this other chapter? Your thesis is enough. You already hit the 100,000 word limit. And I was like, no, there's this other chapter, because when I'm talking and people go, how did you do that? I was like, I've got this other chapter that I said I was going to write. And within it, just, sharing some of those things. But I think it is, highly important that you are being absolutely trusted with, something that we call, taonga, really treasured.
I definitely think that data sovereignty is very important, and tribes owning their intellectual property is important, and especially when it comes to like GIS data, that's especially important. You're asking why would people want to steal that information. There's been plenty of cases where data is taken and then people utilize that to then go loot sacred sites, and then they put that up and they sell these ancient artifacts that they've founded by going through this information. And this topic is a hard one. It's a complex one because we want to be able to save this information. We want to be able to pass it on so we can keep it alive and implement it. But we also don't want people to misuse it and use it for ulterior motives, nefarious purposes. And it's especially complex when you're talking about nations like Yurok, because there's a whole spectrum in the indigenous community. There's some communities that will share ceremony and song, and they share all their information. Lakota is a good example of that with sun dancers. And then there's like the complete opposite end of the spectrum with like the Yurok people being on that opposite end, where you're not even going to know this information unless it's given to you by a family member, and that's not going to be shared outside of your close circle. And so, where do we find that balance? So I think this is a great place for us to kind of just tie it up. I appreciate you taking time from your very busy schedule to have this conversation. And Aroha, I really appreciate you having this conversation as well. You bring so much knowledge to the table. And I love the symmetry that we had in this conversation. And I hope that we can maintain contact and keep hearing about the work that you're involved in.
Thank you so much, Dylan and Brook. It has been amazing. I think the opportunity to come and learn and share knowledge with you both has been fantastic. And yeah, I'd love to keep in touch. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Wakla, it's and Yotwa, thank you. It's been such a nice time getting to chat with you, and I have so many more questions to ask you sometime. Hopefully, maybe one day in person. I would love to go visit again and ask some questions and bother my old professors. And but yeah, also just thank you in general for being a Indigenous woman who has her doctorates and paving that way, because because I've had the privilege to read some of the history in the country, it's not been easy, it sounds like, and it continues to be a struggle here. But I rest assured knowing my struggle is made that much easier by people like you who have pushed through some of those barriers on our behalfs. And even if you're in a different country, that still makes an impact here. So just thank you to you personally for doing that work and making it easier for someone like me.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching.